Hey all, and welcome to this week's episode of the Mike Muldoon Podcast. Welcome to another bonus episode. Today's guest is Gregory Offner, who is a world-renowned dueling piano performer who just happened to have a 15-year career leading sales and marketing efforts for some of the world's largest companies, and then tragedy struck. You see, Gregory had two options: lose his ability to speak forever or undergo vocal surgery that would require a lengthy, multi-month recovery, effectively ending both his sales and music career. So here's my conversation today with Gregory Offner. I'm really interested in hearing about your journey here because, you know, it's interesting. You're like the second person I've talked to recently who was in this sort of career for a very long time and then had a little bit of a setback that sort of had to reinvent their lives, which I've always found quite difficult for people because a lot of times if somebody spends so much time doing something, it's almost like when they have a setback, they suddenly just get defeated. Do you know what I mean? So do you mind telling me a little bit about your story here?
Sure. When I graduated university, I had a degree in psychology, philosophy, and music. And so you can imagine that job opportunities weren't really beating down a path to my doorstep. And I fell into a career in sales, which allowed me to leverage my love of performing, because in many ways, a salesperson is performing, right, and also gave me the freedom and flexibility that many jobs don't come with. So I loved that I could be in different places. I had very little accountability for where and when I showed up, so long as I was making my sales numbers. And I had the opportunity to positively influence what I was paid based on my success. So those were all check boxes in the yes, I want this column for me. At night, I also scratched the performing bug by working at piano bars. And so I had a really happy mix of doing something for money, doing something for love and passion until 2015, when I suffered a pretty severe vocal cord injury. Doctors said I may lose the ability to speak permanently. And so I had to undergo emergency surgery. That turned into 15 surgeries over the better part of a decade and hundreds of hours in voice therapy, months of complete silence while my vocal cords healed. As you can imagine, silence is not good for a singer in terms of career longevity, nor is it good for someone in sales and marketing and consulting. So could I have slogged through and figured it out as far as sales go? Yeah. There was no figure it out for the piano bar. The grueling demands on the voice for a 3 to 5 hour performance multiple nights a week, it literally would have destroyed my voice. So the doctor said, we're not saying you can't sing if you get better, but your days of working at piano bars are over. But the truth is, when I found out I was failing at both jobs, I was only disappointed to lose one of them. And that was the piano bar.
Right.
And it got me curious. Why? I made good money in sales. Mm-hmm. Why was I not upset about losing that? In fact, I saw it as a get out of jail free card. Like I didn't have to explain to anybody why. You know, I always remember Alec Baldwin in Glengarry Glen Ross when he's berating the salespeople. And he goes, you know,
coffee's for closers.
Yeah. Well, he goes, you'll be like this. You'll be like, I was in sales once. It's a tough racket. And I never wanted to be that guy, but I just didn't care. I just happened to be good at sales, but I really didn't care about it. It didn't. There were people I worked with who you could see the desire in their eyes at every sales meeting. They wanted to be on top of the list. They wanted to have the best record. I didn't care. I wasn't anti-sales. I just didn't care, but I loved performing. And I realized in the many months of silence that I had where I was forced to think, I couldn't speak.
Right.
And I just sat and assessed, what was it about the piano bar that I loved so much? And what I realized, Mike, was that even though I could see my name at the top of the leaderboard when it came to selling things, it felt too transactional. I couldn't see the real result of what I was selling. And I know there's a bit that Zig Ziglar has in one of his books where he says, you know, every sale, and this is back in the day when you had paper order forms to fill out.
Right.
Every sale creates a job for the paper factory that creates the sales orders, and then a job for the trucking company that brings the sales orders to your company, and a job for the pen person. That, you know, he goes on the litany of things that happen when you make a sale. I couldn't see it. It was too intangible for me. And yet at the piano bar every night, when we were doing our job well, I could see it in the smiling faces and the gleaming eyes of my customers. And I could see people transformed. They came into the piano bar in sort of a ho-hum mood and they left top of the top. And yeah, alcohol plays a part in that for sure. A small part. Yes, I grant you that. But I think it was part of our ability to bring a room full of strangers together, create a ramshackle choir for the evening, and build this sense of community and collaboration that exists in a piano bar. Because even though we're the musicians that play the song, all of the songs are requested by the audience. They literally create and curate the playlist. Right. So to me, there was something magical about that. And as I searched for what my next step might look like, a mentor appeared in my life that listened to me sort of bitch and moan for about an hour or two. Woe is me. What do I do? How do I make money? What's my life going to look like? And she said, have you ever thought about this? And opened my eyes to this world of public speaking, doing keynotes at conferences and sort of all that entailed. And that's been my life it was a hard pivot that I made for sure. Right. It left many of my friends scratching their heads going, wait, you do what? People pay you to do what? But for the last 4 years, I've been able to travel the world and work with various organizations in many different industries and help their employees become more committed, more engaged, and find more fulfillment through the work that they do.
Right. You know, it's funny, you and I have similar backgrounds. So I've always had kind of a sales background. So I've worked in sales, and it's funny, oddly enough, and I was just talking to someone else about this. I just walked away from a very high paying sales position. And it was interesting because I liked the company. I liked the people I worked with. Everything was great, but I hated the job. And as far as sales, I was very good at it. I was one of the top sales guys, but at the end of the day, I didn't feel fulfilled, and I just felt like life was ticking on by. And the interesting thing too is I have a creative background. So I was a writer for a very long time prior. And then I did stand up for a while to entertain myself and some other people, but I understand that immediate reaction you get, right? When you do sales, you know, you're right. You sell something and, you know, it's gone and you don't really see the end process. You don't get the fulfillment of seeing it all. But like, you know, when you're on stage and you're in front of people, you get that immediate reaction. You see kind of the fruits of your labor and stuff like that. So I 100% get that. It's just interesting that you got pushed into a situation where you kind of got forced out of it, you know, like, because I wonder, I guess my question is to you, if this never would have happened, do you think you would have left the company?
It's a hard pivot to leave sales
right
at that income level once you've been doing it for so long. I had job offers. I think I was more drawn to marketing and advertising, the creative side of that.
Right.
But you got to start at the bottom. And most cases, those are, I don't know today, but certainly when I was looking, $35,000, $40,000 a year jobs. And so to step back from a multi six-figure income is just sort of a very, very hard pill to swallow. I don't think I would have stayed in sales.
Right. So it's interesting that you got kind of like, for my thing was I got pushed out because eventually I just got so frustrated. I felt like my time was going by and I was missing, because my family, I was missing my kids a lot. I didn't have as much flexibility in my sales life. So I was missing my family, my wife, my kids a lot. So it kind of, I feel like life sometimes will push you into a corner and force you to get into this uncomfortable state to have to make a decision. Now for you, it became a medical thing that kind of pushed you into that corner. But, and it's interesting that you're talking about, you know, moving into another industry.
Yeah. Something you just said brought up this concept I just read about. There's an author, R. Buckminster Fuller, and he wrote about this idea of Spaceship Earth. And it's not the Disney attraction,
right.
But it's this concept that if we were to think about life and Earth in particular as a spaceship, and we're all members of a crew, what is our prime directive? Well, it's to keep the spaceship moving, to keep the spaceship running. So my personal belief about purpose and life, not to get too, spiritual,
that's right,
is that we all have an opportunity to make a difference.
Right.
And I looked at what I was doing in sales and I could not see how I was making a difference. But I also didn't have maybe the metaphorical permission slip that I needed to move into a different direction and to apply my skills elsewhere. And so this individual, this mentor that stepped into my life, she was this permission slip. She didn't necessarily tell me anything I didn't know, but she was a complete stranger that was able to see through all my, I'll call it neuroses for lack of a better term, but all these stories I had created in my head about what my life had to look like because of what it had been in the past. And she kind of, did the Dikembe Mutombo and said, no, 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 no. This is what I think it could look like. And maybe because it was a disinterested stranger who had no stake in the game either way, whether I succeeded or failed, whether I was happy or sad, this was just her opinion. And I thought, if this person can see it, maybe I have a moral obligation to look in the mirror and see what I see. And that's when all of this change and transformation began.
It's really interesting to see a lot of people who are unhappy is just because, and I like to say they're living on what's called the y-axis. Okay. So you've got what you want to be doing and what you're actually doing. Right. And that's where the dissatisfaction comes in. So some people who, the happiest people in the world are completely aligned, especially if you find somebody who loves their job, they tend to love their life. Like if they're doing something, they're waking up every day with, it was Earl Nightingale talked about waking up every day with a worthy ideal. Basically, I get up every day to teach because I love teaching. I get up every day, and I think he even used it at the time because it was a relevant job back in the 50s. I pump gas because I love pumping gas. So when you close that y-axis and you get closer to being aligned with your purpose and kind of what you're doing, that's where true happiness comes from. So a lot of times what I see is that you were trying to fill a need. And I think that's kind of what your mentor probably did, was figured out a way to get you thought to fulfill this happiness had to be this way. And they said, well, no, there's so many other ways to fulfill this need that you're trying to get, which then puts you towards speaking and stuff like that. It's actually a pretty insightful mentor you got there.
Yeah, I'm grateful to her every single day. It is true that I looked at my job initially as a massive step up in life. I went from being a college kid who could barely afford his car insurance payments to having a car package, an insurance package, a gas card. I mean, it was like, holy crap, what a transformation. But as with many things, I began to habituate and that became the new normal. And so then making six figures became the new normal. And it was this keeping up with the Joneses. I'll be happy when, and there is no when. You either decide to be happy, you do what makes you happy, choose, I think, what makes you happy, or you're consigned to this life of outward comparison. And that was the real challenge for me, Mike, was that when I made this change and several of my close friends sort of, questioned me, and I explained how I was feeling and where I was at in life, they were surprised. They were taken aback. They said, I had no idea you were that miserable, because from the outside, it seems like, you got everything. You got a great job, you got a great life, you got a great wife, you got all these things that a lot of people would kill to have. And still, it was not doing it for me.
Right. It's it's really interesting that you're talking about your friendship stuff. I always say, and one of the biggest reasons people don't change is because of fear. Now, fear in there's multiple different ways why they won't change, but it's fear. And one of the biggest fears is, what happens if I make the change and I fail? What will people think about me? So that keeps a lot of people on the same path of, I'm not going to take this risk. So I guess with you though, when you decided to make this change, did you realize that maybe your friendships changed, your circle changed, the people you were around changed?
So if I forget to come back to it, ask me that question again, but I want to address what you just said. I think that in addition to my mentor, what enabled me to make that change was that I think I said earlier, a get out of jail free card. There is that fear that like, well, what if I can't make it? And the way I saw my life at the time was I just had this traumatic series of experiences of nearly losing my voice, which for a singer is a death-like experience.
Right.
And so I didn't care. And in fact, I said to my wife at the time, I've got a nest egg. I've got this money saved up. I said, I am fully prepared to burn all of this money in pursuit of this thing that I think will really connect what I love to do with what I could do for the world. And if it doesn't work, at least I can look in the mirror and say, you tried. I tried something. Yeah. And I don't know that I would have had that courage, but for that traumatic experience. And so for me, it was the best, worst thing to ever happen.
So, because it kind of gave you license to go out there, because you're right. If you would have just walked away, then it's like, you had no choice. So if anybody questioned your motive, well, why are you walking away from sales or this? You're like, I can't talk. I can't do my job. So I guess in some way, I guess in some way it did give you a little bit of a leeway. Whereas, most people might have questioned you if you didn't have that challenge. They might say, why are you leaving your job? What do you mean? You make all this money. You got a great job. At least you had and the out was, I can't do my job anymore.
Yeah.
So, because that's the other thing you see a lot of times with people is that they'll, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself and maybe seen it in other people, is that when people try to make any change in their lives, I use this in a book I've been writing. I talk about like the lawyer who wants to walk away from being a partner, right? Because he wants to open a bakery. And immediately everybody's like, well, why? But that's stupid. Like, bakeries fail. You got this great job. You got a great job. So they stay in the business, but they're unhappy. And one of the things that I like to talk about all the time is life is about living, and most people exist in it. If you ask people if they're living, they'll say, oh yeah, I'm breathing. Look at me. What do you mean I'm on? But they're not. They're existing in it. And what you're doing is you're breathing life into it. So you're married, right? That's How did the wife take it when you were just like, hey, we're going this way?
She is incredibly supportive. Right. And has told me now, 4 years in that it's worked, that she said I was privately biting my nails and going, what the hell are we going to do? Like, this is craziness, what he's suggesting. And particularly given that 6 months in to me changing a profession to speak at live events, COVID happened. Right. And so that was a real, test of sort of courage and commitment right at the outset. And I think that was also one of the best, worst things to ever happen to me, because my sales ability initially carried me in terms of being able to create revenue in this business, where I think the average person who's like a maybe professor that decides they want to go into speaking, if they can't navigate the sales part of the speaking business, they will be a very impoverished person with great ideas. Because the business part of speaking is getting someone to give you a check for this idea. Of course. I was very good at that because I brought the sales aspect into this business. But despite all of my, platform or performing skills that I'd amassed over nearly 2 decades of being a performer, the speaking world's a little bit different. COVID leveled the playing field. It made even the best keynote speakers have to reinvent their game for virtual, when I was just simply inventing my game for virtual. Right. So it enabled me to create friendships and mentorships with people in the business who have been amazing to me and helping me get my bearings in this industry. And it also enabled me to sort of make a name for myself. And although I've got a long way to go and a lot to learn in this industry, I've been able to make an impact in a bigger way than I think I would have been able to if it weren't for COVID and if it weren't for going virtual. I built the world's first, to my knowledge, virtual piano bar. So when folks were burnt out from these, bring your dog to our Zoom or wear your favorite sweatshirt to our Zoom, they were bringing me on and I was saying, I'm going to play your favorite songs live. And the best part is there's no bar tab at the end of the night. So grab a cocktail, grab a friend, hop on the couch and enjoy the show. It brought so much joy into my life and into their lives to be able to do that. And I got paid for it. And it got to the point where once we knew that the world was safe enough, I don't mean to go off on a tangent about this.
No, it's fine. This is great.
I was able to employ some of my other friends who worked at piano bars that had just shut down. I said, come on in. You're going to be the performer for this show. So it was unbelievably fulfilling for me to have that experience. And Kim was supportive throughout the whole thing and has been, writing a book. I'm just putting the finishing touches on it. It goes to publication to our copy editor at the end of this week. It'll be available in early January. But this book, The Tip Jar Culture, man, it's been a time suck. It's been a lot while we've had a 6-month-old baby or, a newborn baby. It's been a lot. And Kim just continues to amaze me with how supportive she is, how she encourages me. She therapizes me from time to time when I need it, when things get a little stressful. And you had asked earlier about friends. And I think any business owner or entrepreneur can relate to this. Some of the people who you think are going to be your staunchest, most dependable advocates really sort of disappear. And then people who you never imagined would support you so wholeheartedly show up. And it's just a fascinating experience. And in many ways, it is less about how I'm changing and more about how they're changing or not changing relative to my change. I know that's sort of a little complicated if you're listening to a podcast, but
I get it. It's really interesting. I tell my wife all the time, 'cause my wife's got her own company as well. And I tell her all the time, I go, it's really interesting that the people that are closest to you tend to be the ones that support you the least, right? When you start your endeavor, maybe that, like, let's just say you opened up a bakery. I use bakery again. I don't know why I keep going to bakery, but it just seems like something you'd
it's
go out there
time for a croissant, Mike. Let's be at 10 a.m. when we're recording this.
So,
it's time for a croissant and coffee.
I feel like what happens a lot of times is, first off, I think a lot of times your friends know you so well, they already come with preconceived notions and judgments about who you are. That's why I think a lot of times your friends aren't really the good people to go to for advice, because they'll look at you, have all this knowledge on you, and then they'll say, that's not really your thing. Your friends mean well. It's just, and they're there for so many other things, and having friends is so important. But I think sometimes when you go off on an endeavor, it's like if you open that bakery, they might come the first week, buy some bread, be there, support you, but then they kind of fade away. And you're right. It's the strangers that suddenly start appearing, and they get really, they become the support group, right? I've often said to my wife too, like, how many times it's been like, this friend hasn't been able to help you, but this stranger is more than willing to go out of their way to help you. The sad part is, I think the more successful you become, the bigger you come, then your friends come back, because now they're, and it's not in a bad way, but they're like, now they become your biggest adversary, your biggest fans, right? Because now, like, you're my best friend, but you're also super successful. Now I'm going to talk even more about you. So it is interesting. Again, friends serve so many great purposes of, just being there to offload on and have a great time with and all that. But I think sometimes when you're doing stuff like this, it's always the strangers that sort of step up and sort of help put a little bit more effort in than your friends. Again, no criticism of friends. Friends, they serve so many other amazing purposes that we need in our lives. But I think when you go off on endeavors like this, it tends to be the strangers that.
It goes back to that word you used earlier, that F word, with fear.
Right.
Is that there's a lot of fear surrounding change, whether it's our own change or change of the people. I remember my, it sounds odd at 42 to say my best friend, but one of my dearest friends, when he told me that he was moving several states away, I was initially angry. What are you doing to this? Like, we're not going to be able to hang out every weekend. And like, I was such a dick to him right when he moved, and it was not intentional. Sorry, I shouldn't curse on the podcast. I was such a jerk to him. If you want to edit that, I was such a jerk to him when he first moved, whether he knew it or not, because I felt hurt. But it was more about what does that say about me? Now, that wasn't his fault. He's living his life and trying to do the best he can. And so I think that comes up unintentionally, to your point, in friendships, that as folks change, you kind of go, well, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for us? And then as that change becomes a little bit more dependable, it's easier to circle back into orbit. In many ways, it's like technology and early adopters. There are some people who are quick to jump on. I remember, God, when QR codes first came out, talk about something the pandemic didn't kill, but actually resurrected. When QR codes first came out, people really had no idea what to do with them and thought they were just worthless. And now they are everywhere, ubiquitous, right?
I've got them on my business card.
Yeah, same. So it is fascinating. You're so spot on with that your best friends sort of do circle back once they see that, I get it now. Like, they have to sort of step back to see really what's going on in your life. And then once that picture becomes clear, then they feel comfortable re-engaging. And
it's also, a lot of times, again, I've got amazing friends and they're great and they're supportive in so many other ways. But, when you go on some, I think you're right. They do have to step back. But it is, I was going to get back to some earlier you said, too. Have you realized that your growth came when you started giving more service, right? It seemed like to me, like when you looked at, hey, I'm going to start giving this to the world. Like, I'm going to take my skills, my piano skills, and start playing for people and doing this. A lot of times people don't realize that by giving, you'll get more. Some people are so closed off in the world that they think, well, I'm not going to give anything to anybody till I get, because then once I get, I'll start giving. But a lot of times we have to start giving to actually start receiving. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, I know what you're saying. So I want to approach the conversation or that question from two different perspectives, because I think my growth
actually required me to get selfish.
Right.
Okay. I would constantly make choices to make other friends happy. So if somebody was going out and was like, "Hey, come out have drinks with us," and I didn't really feel like it, and maybe I had important stuff to do the next day, but I didn't want to not get the invite the next time. So fear, again, leading decision making. Yeah. I would go, all right, yeah, I'll go out for a few. And so I wasn't selfishly selfish. And I think once I said, no, I'm going to stay home. I got a book I'm reading. I want to read this, or right. I want to work on this project and do a personal inventory. When I started doing more of that, I started to really tap into what made me happy, what fulfilled me. And I learned more about myself. And I think that was invaluable. However, I do think from a maybe let's call it spiritual or personal fulfillment standpoint, and then, yeah, it does have knock-on effects in growth. Yes, giving. I give freely. It's one of the things I love most about this community that I found.
Right.
Speakers operate, most of us, the ones that I associate with anyway, we operate on this idea that there is enough business out there for all of us. Sure. The idea isn't how do I get a bigger slice of the pie? It's how do we make the pie bigger for everybody?
Right.
And I have worked in industries where I jokingly say some of my past colleagues would have stabbed their mother and my mother to get a deal out from under me.
Right.
And it's just a very uncomfortable and surface level friendly, but deep level, oh, you better watch your back, brother, type of industry. And I do not play well in that type of sandbox. I play well in the type of sandbox where we all treat each other equally and try to help each other and celebrate each other's success. That describes the speaking industry, at least, again, the people I associate with in it perfectly.
Right. You know, it's funny because so many people in sales and the seller have a limited mindset. Oh, they're getting. There's plenty for everybody. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a lot of, and when I was talking about before, I was talking about giving. I wasn't talking about it's really interesting because I want to circle back on this as well about your friends, like going out and saying yes and giving them all your time. I was just talking about like what you do, giving your services, you know, giving your, you know, something you're passionate about and not saying, oh, I'm going to charge all this money to do it. I'm going to give it to you, or I'm going to give you some advice or some help, or, you know, I'm going to help you with a speaking engagement, whatever it is. But really interesting thing. And it's funny because it's my next podcast or my next 2 podcasts I'll be doing, because again, I do a lot of my individual ones, is actually on the power of no. And they say people who, I was reading about this a while ago, and I, you know, got all these podcasts and do, but they say people who have a hard time saying no tend to, it actually ails them. It actually creates sickness in their body, because a lot of, and if you follow me on this, one of the reasons is, and it's funny because my wife had the hardest time saying no for the longest time on anything. She'd always say yes because she didn't want to offend anybody. She wanted to be a good friend. The problem is you say yes to something that you don't really want to do, and then all of a sudden you're kind of hemming and hawing. I don't really want to be here. You're doing things. It's creating an energy in your body. It's creating like a negative emotion. And depending, the more that thing you really don't want to do becomes a bigger thing. Like you tell your friend, you know, they say, do you want to go out with you this week? You go, I don't know, maybe, let me think about it. But you know, you don't really want to, but then they take it as, well, you might want to go out. And then it becomes, and then you start stressing, how do I get out of it? So it's really interesting. And they say people who have a hard time saying no, it actually physically affects their health.
Yeah, I think it's Diana Chapman who coined the phrase, the whole body yes.
Right.
And I try to operate under that. And as anyone with kids can attest, sometimes you don't have a choice in saying yes to certain things. But generally now, if it's not a whole body yes, for me, it's a no, because there's some part of me that knows, I don't want to say knows better, but that knows there is a better place for my energy or my attention or my presence than what I'm being asked to do or to give of. And it is hard. It is very hard to do for someone like me that is an entertainer, and I love seeing the crowd applause. I love to make people happy. So, you know, it's very hard, but it's very important.
Oh man. Well, and it's funny though, because you have kids now and your whole life changes, you know. Gregory, single guy out in the world, and you know, time is your always, you know, you got so much of it now. You have kids and you have life, and you know, that time becomes really important. So the things we say yes to, you know, like I said, have to be more full body yeses or they're no. And I'm that way. I'm either, I don't even, you want no. Just know. Well, Gregory, listen, I just want to, I just want to finish this up real quick. I don't want to take up much more of your time, but let me ask you this. So what advice would you give? Just, it seems like the young people in the world are struggling right now. They see, when you and I, we're about the same age, when you and I came out of college, we were like, oh, we're in our 20s and we've got all these years to figure it out. That's how I kind of felt. And it seems like young people nowadays are just stressed out that they don't have it figured out at 22, So, do you have any advice to anybody?
Yeah. It's all bullshit. I think that it has never been so thrust in our face.
No, man.
This is a real challenge for folks who are young right now. Because when you and I don't want to go to bullying, but it's a perfect example for this. When you and I went to school, if there was a bully that didn't like us, their ability to creep into our life and influence how we felt about ourselves ended at the schoolyard or at the bus stop.
You're right.
Now it creeps into everything. And this facade that is presented on many social media and all over the internet of how people are doing and who's got it figured out is in kids' faces 24/7. And it's all manufactured and curated. Nobody, whenever I get to speak to kids, and I love the opportunity, that's a place where I give freely. Nobody knows what October 19th, 2023 looks like. Anybody that tells you they do, it's all bluster and confidence to try to get something you've got. They want your attention, your trust, your confidence, your effort, your something. Nobody knows. We're all figuring this out together. And the only thing that you can do to tilt the odds in your favor is to work on those skills within yourself that are transferable and valuable no matter what profession you're in, no matter how technology impacts it. That's your mental models. How do you see the world? How do you synthesize and process information? Spend time studying philosophy. That's how people utilize rhetoric and thoughts. Spend time studying psychology and understand how the brain works. How does our decision-making change when we're in stressful scenarios?
Right.
How does our decision-making change when people are dangling carrots, things that we want in front of us versus dangling potential loss? Understanding, I always talk about, imagine buying a Ferrari without an engine. Like, why would you do that? It's just this lovely, huge paperweight that'll sit in your driveway. The engine is what makes it go. Most human beings don't understand their engine. They don't understand how the brain works, how it impacts everything that they do. Well, so you don't have to go and become a neuroscientist, but learn about your frickin' engine. That's the most important thing that a young person could do right now to set themselves up for success. And then to piggyback on that, I would say, don't buy into the hype that you got to have it figured out today. You do have plenty of time.
You got time. It's funny. One of the things I talk about again in my book, we've touched on about 3 key points in my book here, but one of them is I always say, understand your tears. And what I mean by that is not so much your crying one, but if you can just understand the basics of that, every thought creates an emotion and every emotion creates an action. Every action creates that result. Then you'll treat your thoughts. You'll be more in control of them. Right. Because again, if you're having these negative thoughts, your emotions are going to be, out of whack, and your actions you're going to take are probably not going to be very good, and your results at the end are going to be where you want to be. So I always just tell young people that way, because we can talk about subconscious programming and all this other stuff, but sometimes you'll lose them. But I just say, look, just monitor it, and I use perfect little examples. Like, think about the next time you get mad. What were you thinking about? Oh, that person didn't call you. They didn't text you back. Now you're mad. What are they doing? Now you're angry. Your action, you text them, you call them, you Facebook them, you do whatever. The result is they just never got the message, and now you're in a fight.
Not to go off on a tangent, but just there's a Key and Peele sketch about that's funny, about 2 people getting text messages and wildly misinterpreting what the other person means, and it devolves into a really funny scenario to go watch. But yeah, same. Mike, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to speak with you and your audience. You saying that right there is actually funny. It's like if more people just picked up the phone and got on the phone and didn't rely on text messages or Facebook messages or whatever it is, they might realize their lives are in a better place, because you know what? You're able to sit there and just talk to people about what's going on. All right, man, Gregory, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate your time, buddy. It's a pleasure.